Hello and welcome back to Writing with Emotion. I am so excited today to have not only my co-teacher, Victoria Crowder. Say hi, Victoria. And also, are hosting today Ken Caputo. Ken, you want to say hi? If you say hi, then your voice will come up. Your face will come up with the voice.
Oh, there
I'll
we
get
go.
it.
Hello, everybody. Pleasure to meet you all.
And we wanted to meet Ken Caputo because he is a very, very fascinating fellow. And what personally made me really want to get to know him better was a learning area that he set up that was just his life stream that he would like to get back to one day, which was called Quester's Way. And so many of us who are involved in writing or reading, we're very much involved in that quest for knowledge and information and life fulfillment. And Ken has a really interesting story that he can share with us about this amazing place that he organized. And Victoria and I think that it might have some great benefits for how we go forward with teaching writing, Victoria with the writing process, and me with the character development part of it. So Ken has also been a teacher of martial arts for decades and has owned his own studio for martial arts. But I'm going to turn the floor over to him and let him start us off with an introduction. And then Victoria and I will seek out answers to what we are dying to know about Quester's Way and something called the momentum learning process. Okay, Ken.
Okay, well, so I'll start back a little bit. So yes, back in the 90s, I took over a martial arts school, and mainly because I just knew I wanted to teach, and I love the idea, especially of working multi-generationally, with children and adults, and not losing them every year like you do in a more traditional school setting. Plus, I'm not very good at following other people's rules, so structure is not something I needed to be able to create my own structure that made sense. And it was never really about teaching martial arts. It was about helping people be their best selves. And this was just an interesting kind of vehicle to do that. So we built this business, and I knew nothing about running a business at the time either. So a big part of that process was understanding what that meant when you're doing something you love, but you also have to keep the electricity on, and eventually you're meeting payroll expenses, and other people's lives are your responsibility, all that kind of stuff. So I took over this martial arts school, built it up over the first decade from maybe 20 or 30 students that were there to over 200 in this tiny little 800 square foot facility that couldn't hold the ball. So we expanded, and eventually we ended up with a second location. We had about 400 total students. And our goal was really to be a resource for the community, an ally for families, and to be a modern learning facility. And that was really, really catching our attention. So we started focusing very intensely on how people learn and what allows them to feel successful, and also how to design positive, productive learning environments. So fast forward 20 years of doing that, donating time to school systems, working with local businesses, and we had an opportunity to step into a space that used to be a big box store in this little local mall. It used to be a J.C. Penney's and had been sitting empty for several years. So we had been recognizing that we were starting to feel like the idea of just teaching martial arts was becoming limiting. And
Mm.
our goal was to be able to help people that they wanted the things that we were teaching, but they weren't interested in that specific discipline. So we decided to take this learning system that had been developing over a quarter of a century. We ended up calling it the Momentum Learning System, and creating a 16,000 square foot facility. We called it Quester's Way. It had 5 classrooms that taught movement-based stuff, Move You. It had something called the think tank, where we would teach project-based things, left and right brains. So you would learn creative writing or painting or messy science and problem solving. And then it had an area called Game On, where we did more like game-based play. And you would learn things like chess. We even taught Dungeons and Dragons, which was super popular, especially with the adults, believe it or not. So the whole idea was this learning environment, and then we built a restaurant within it. So there was a healthy eating cafe, so that people could learn to eat healthy foods and make that fun and interesting, especially for kids. And we put a giant indoor park in it and staff that with educators so that there was social emotional learning and all that kind of stuff going on. So that's what we built. And yeah, and we ran it for about 4 years. We unfortunately had to close it down right before the pandemic hit. But our goal eventually is to be able to scale that up throughout the world. But we're not quite there yet. So right now I've been focused more on working with entrepreneurs who are doing their own projects and help them bring their value to the world. That's about as short as I can keep it.
Well, Victoria, you have a background in the martial arts as well, don't you?
I do not actually. I own a self-defense company, but it is completely separate and independent of anything martial arts training. It was built that way.
Oh, okay.
So our program originated out of law enforcement. Our founder was a maximum security prison guard, had to deal with the worst of the worst and had no weapons. And so the program was born out of his developing his own situational awareness, understanding pre-attack indicators, because he couldn't have a weapon. So he had to keep the trouble way further out there than when it's right here. So then our principles proceed from there using gross motor skills, things anyone, any skill, any age, any fitness level can do. So we purposefully kept it away from martial arts because that turns a lot of people off.
Oh, okay. But both
That was
have
smart.
So you guys both have a strong movement background,
Mm-hmm.
and which is really fascinating. The thing that amazed me the most about, well, Quester's Way, for one thing, if I were a child, heck, if I were, as an adult, as a senior citizen, I'd love to have one, within
Yeah,
easy reach and be
right.
involved in that. Can you imagine what fun it would be to be in a messy science class? And
Oh,
so, but the whole concept of learning to me is so fascinating because in a way, if you think about it, when we create stories, it either our stories are so often about trying to get a hold of something that's going on in our own minds and find a voice for it, and actually learning where did that come from within ourselves, and then playing that off against fictional characters in a fictional world to help give it life and breath. And then of course that leads you into a whole nother world of writing on its own. But Victoria, can you tell us a little bit about the for people who are just brandy new into the writing process? What if someone wanted to do some writing and they'd never ever tried it before? What gets them started?
I've taught a lot of intro writing classes, and I was lucky enough to have students that were amazing guinea pigs. So we would try something one week, try something the next week, and really start to understand what was working. And what I found over the years is the first thing you have to let lead you is your zone of fascination. Thank you, Scott Shepard. What are you excited about? What are you fascinated about? What could you sit down and read about all day long? Well, if that's poetry, then that's where you start. If you love novels, maybe you love science fiction, that's where you start. So you begin with the things that you naturally love because number one, it's inherently motivating. You're already interested in it. And it gives you a metric by which to measure yourself. So if you've been reading science fiction your entire life, and now, maybe you're in your late 20s, whatever, and you know what you love, then you know what stories stay with you. You go back and read stories because they've stayed with you or because you love them. So let's start there. Let's start with maybe a character idea and a plot idea, and let's explore those and see where we can get to. And then literally we just start writing, write a letter to your best friend, write a journal entry, write a letter to yourself from your character. There's a million ways to get the words on the page. Anybody that has seen any of my classes or sat in any of them knows I've always said, get the words on the page because they won't stay in your head forever. You will think about these things and you might have a thread or you might have an idea. If you don't jot it down, you will eventually lose it. So, and then number 2 is, if you don't have anything on the page, you don't have anything to edit. And real writing, good writing, is editing. Let's face it, it's writing and rewriting, editing and rewriting. So as soon as you have something on the page, even if it's a paragraph, then you've got something to work with, because you can say, all right, this sentence captures what I mean, this one doesn't, so let's work on that. And that gives you something that you can follow through the process of, creating a page, and then maybe that page turns into a completed scene. Then we're going to go back and we're going to pick the things out that we can use to carry forward. So start with where you're fascinated. If poetry is what you love, then that's what you do. If you like rhyming verse, blank verse, free form, whatever you like, let's start with that. If you're really good at rhyming, then let's start with a whole page of rhyming words, and then let's start pairing those up, and then let's start making lines out of it. So there's a million inroads in, but it always begins with, what do you love the most? And what could you work on all day long that it doesn't feel like work? Because writing is really hard work. So anything that you can do as part of your process to make it more fun, more engaging, I always recommend starting there.
Very, very interesting. Very interesting. So that will be something we'll certainly want to explore with our people, because that's one of the things that we want to do with our group, is to get to be more, we can engage with one another more. One of the challenges that we had I faced with teaching a 35 lesson class, it was just all output. And, we want to have a group of involvement. So Ken, how on earth did you end up in your center teaching so many different subjects?
Well, actually, it was really just, you create the space, and we're very clear. Like, our whole idea is, our focus has been design a space where the right students and the right teachers can find each other. And what would happen is someone would come in and they're like, I've always wanted, like, we have a wonderful mom who ended up developing a program called Reading Warriors. And it was for dyslexic kids, because she had 2 dyslexic kids that really struggled in school. So she was trying to cut through all the stigma from that, and the challenges they face, and the fear of the parents, and give them that support. So she didn't have a program to teach. She had an idea, and she had skills, and then she saw what our space was designed to do, and then she would just say, I'd like to do that. So a lot of times it was really just exactly what you guys are talking about, which I think is so powerful. It's start where they are, and what's the entry point? What's the thing that's capturing their attention? And it's funny, when we train teachers, we tell them, you're really an awakened guide. You've just walked this path and you've learned some things, and you have the ability now to help other people safely get from point A to point B. But if they're interested in mushrooms, don't talk about the trees.
Right?
Talk about the mushrooms, because that's, so you've got to pay attention to where their interest and their experience was. And that's what we found, is these wonderful people that had an interest. And then if there were students that were curious about that thing, we just wanted to pair them up and give them a structure that would allow for consistent and predictable results over and over again over time. So it just led to more and more classes. Like, teaching Dungeons and Dragons is not something I ever would have thought. And that ended up being, actually, it was interesting. It was very powerful for a lot of teenagers, especially if they were somewhere on the spectrum, because they could safely practice problem solving and collaborative social skills by pretending to be a barbarian or a wizard.
Right?
and it was amazing watching how they learned to interact in an environment where they could make mistakes. And there was even a randomness that would cause mistakes because they're rolling dice.
Yeah.
They didn't even have to feel like they were responsible for the outcomes. And it was so much value. And we had no idea. Just someone came to us and said, I love it. Do you think other people would love it? And we're like, I don't know, let's find out.
Yeah.
And sure enough, they
I will.
did. Adults
awesome.
too. We'd have adults there till like 3 a.m. playing D&D. It was awesome.
That's great. It's so funny that you say that, because the first class that I taught for the public that wasn't related, to a specific program or something, I was right out of college, and in some of my junior and senior year writing classes, they would always have, have you read your work. And more I was finding my peers were having absolute meltdowns at the thought of having to read out loud. Oh, I can't do that. Can you read this for me instead? They absolutely could not stand the thought of public speaking, or, heaven forbid, speaking their own work. So that kind of put that thought, in the back of my brain. And I thought, I was a debater all through junior high school, and I was recruited into college onto the college squad at UMKC. So I can speak on any stage. I don't care. And it was so strange to me that people had such trouble with that. So I thought, you know what? I'm going to do a community class. I started it at the library. It was a free class, 2 nights a week. And it was preparing your own poetry for public performance. And I was shocked at how many people showed up, because they were terrified to read their own work in front of even 2 people, much less a room of 30. So that was by far some of the most rewarding teaching I ever did, was seeing, by the end of the course, I did it over 12 weeks. Everybody wrote 2 poems. And then at the end, we had a public performance. Everyone invited their guests. We had standing room only, rooms of 100 people for 6 poets. And it was amazing. They walked up there, shoulders back, confident, greeted the room, gave their performance. And it was amazing. It was so, so cool to be part of that. And I still get notes to this day on social media where someone will say, my kids now are struggling with this. And so, we're working through it. And it's so cool to see. Stephanie talks about making ripples. That was definitely one of the first ones for me, because I realized one of my superpowers is that very thing, being able to see what someone is struggling with and finding an inroad so that I can give them some tools that can hopefully help them get through that. So that was super fun.
Thank you,
That is
Victoria, because
awesome.
you just expressed so clearly why I wanted to create LiLLiPub, because you could see what students are struggling with. On the other side of a camera, I cannot see what anyone is struggling with. That's why we need LiLLiPub, so we can be there and interact and be able to see that. And I think that if you would wanted to teach that class at LiLLiPub, you'd have a digital room full of students ready to learn that very, very thing, be it their poetry or their essay or whatever, because so many are frightened of that.
Yeah, the taster course, Writing Without a Net, that is that class.
Yeah.
We explored all, like 12 different kinds of poetry. That way everyone could choose something they were comfortable with.
Oh.
And that was the foundation upon which that course, I think I ran that course for 6 years, every semester. And that's what led to my going to teach at the Kansas City Art Institute. There was a teacher in the audience that approached me afterward and said, "This is a crazy, harebrained idea. Would you consider teaching at the Art Institute?" I was like, "Sure."
Wow.
The rest is history.
Wow.
So yeah, absolutely. I would love that.
Yeah. So when we've also got to figure out for Ken how he can get back to creating things like Questor's Way, couldn't you imagine taking, we're both moms. Can you imagine taking our kids to a place like Questor's Way, and they're off doing dance or whatever it is they're exploring, and we're sitting in the cafeteria consuming, a healthy snack, and watching the little ones that aren't big enough to be in a class playing in the play space.
Mhm.
That kind of thing needs to be constructed. So,
Right.
it's it's a dream that I just would love to see Ken and Stephanie be able to pull that off again. So,
Absolutely. Absolutely.
They're
Well, or we're the
expensive.
writer moms. We're the writer moms in the cafeteria having our 30
yeah,
minutes to write while the kids go play D&D.
yeah.
Yep. No, we had, and I'll tell you, that was listening to parents through the years. One of the biggest challenges with them was, especially if you have multiple kids, how do you get them everywhere they need to go? And they
Mhm.
always lost an opportunity to care for themselves, So, and that was what was so cool, because mom is doing Zumba after they didn't have to cook because they all had dinner together. And now the kids are burning off energy in the park before they all go home. So you could
Wow.
create, like, because our whole idea is meaningful human connection and empowered learning. So you create an environment where everybody can have experiences that are interesting to them, and there's a central gathering place. And that, so that was, but when you're dealing with brick and mortar, especially something of this size, it's a monetary thing. It's just, they're very, very expensive to build, and staff and all of that. So, we'll work it out, but it's going to take a little bit of time. But I was going to say, just as you guys were talking, I was thinking about a class that I actually designed that speaks to the value of what you guys are doing. And it's when you give someone the tools to write, it unlocks part of themselves that they may not even know exists. And I think, Kathleen, I might have told you about it. I had done that class called the Friendly Monster class.
Yeah.
And so basically it was a writing class, but it was also a crafting class. So, and this is 7 and 8-year-olds. And the goal was to write a story about a monster that solves a problem that's to the good of the world. And these kids were, and they'd make, like, I wasn't involved with the crafting because I'm not very good with that at all. It would have been a disaster. So we had other people that were, helping them make, just out of paper and stuff, these different creatures, or they would just draw it however they wanted to express it. But these kids were coming up with things like, one kid made a monster and he told the story about it, and he would eat garbage and poop out rose petals. And
I
the
love
whole
that
story,
kid.
it was so awesome. Yeah. And they're like creating limitless energy battery packs that would recycle themselves. And they had all of these incredibly creative ideas that really told you a lot about what their untapped potential was. Some of them, their solutions were very human oriented. Others were kind of almost like science oriented, or, so it was just so neat. And it all came about because they were given a space to just be creative, but it wasn't free form. It was structured enough that they were like banks to the river. And when I hear about what you guys are doing, it's very much giving people that. And won't it be amazing to see what they'll create, what they'll learn about themselves in the process?
Yeah.
Yep.
And just being able to be part of it is amazing. It really is.
And then to
Yep.
have the potential of a safe place in which to share it.
Mm-hmm.
Because on our program, it's a month-long program, and the first 3 weeks we're developing the content, but the fourth week it's write and share. And we've got a safe place on LiLLiPub. We'll have a Google Drive directory. You can post your stories in a safe place where the only people that can look at them are the people in your class with you. And sometimes it's just as scary to post your writing. Well, maybe not just as scary. Public speaking is really terrifying for most people, but it's almost as scary sometimes to post your writing as it is
Oh, it
to.
is. I would argue it absolutely is, because you're taking something that is so personal, that has such meaning to you, and you're giving it to someone else so that they can essentially do whatever they want with it. If if you're in a mean group, if you're in a heavily critical group, there's all different ways that the what if monster can come up with. But I think offering a place that is based on kindness and helping you be your best,
Yeah.
that's the group I want to belong to.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, and we found that over and over again. When you create that space where people have a sense of safety and empowerment, they will do amazing things within it. Your job ends up being to just stay out of the way.
Right?
You know,
Yeah. That's so true.
it's so amazing just when you give people just that room and that feeling of trust. And now they can even take criticism and
Right.
they can hear it in a healthy context and not feel that it's an attack. And there's so much value in creating spaces like that. Absolutely.
Well, I think a lot of especially young writers, they want good feedback. I mean, I always wanted to hear, what do you think about this? Do you think this works or not? But I was really lucky that I don't know that in my young writing life, I don't know that I was ever really in a super negative group. Of course, we didn't have the internet, so you were looking at me and I was looking at you in the room. But that's something I think that young writers long for is, you've written this thing and it's your heart, and you're the question that nobody wants to ask, but everyone has is this any good? Is this good? Are you interested? And even now, 100,000 plus words into my novel series, even I ask that question. Does this chapter work? And I'm so fortunate that Kathleen and I are in a workshop group together over on Scott's network. And I mean, we've just attracted the most wonderful people who are so supportive and constructive. Now, they'll call you out and criticize you if it needs to be done, but it's because they want you to be your best. And we all know that. So having experienced firsthand how transformative that group is, that is exactly the template that I want to continue over in LiLLiPub, because that's our own value, and that's what we have to offer to everyone who wants to join is, you want to know, is this any good? Bring it in and let's either cheer because it's awesome or let's make it the best it can be, and we'll do it together.
All right.
Yeah.
Thank you so very, very much. And thank you so much, Ken, for joining us. And we're going to be eager to watch your experience bringing Quester's Way back to the world, because the world certainly needs it. And thank you for helping us you've been such a help in helping us plan out this new course that's starting May 6th. So watch for us on YouTube and join us in LiLLiPub to take it to a personal level. Thank you very much, folks. Bye-bye.